We're looking at Australia's most famous pigeon. He soared into our hearts when we learned that he flew all the way from Alabama to this backyard in Officer. But Joe the pigeon is on death row. He's flown straight into a storm of trouble. The government wants to put him down.
Either fly home or face the consequences.
Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to bully the Australian government. Specifically today we're going to be looking at all of the various ways in which the Australian government flushes our money down the toilet in regards to various construction projects and infrastructure. So today we're going to point and laugh at these dickheads because they deserve a lot worse than that, but we can't do that, so we're going to point and laugh at them instead. It's the least we can do. And we're actually going to be starting off here with the most famous Australian building of all time, the Sydney Opera House. So in 1957, the New South Wales government held a competition where participants from around the world could submit designs for what would eventually become the Sydney Opera House. The competition was won by Danish architect Bjarne Utzon. Initially, the engineers were kind of having trouble figuring out exactly how they'd turn his drawings into a reality, until in 1961 he came up with this idea of kind of cutting chunks out of a sphere in order to figure out the dimensions for each part of the opera house, and that's what they ended up going with in the end. Now, the reason I put such an iconic building on this list is not because the building itself was a failure, but because it was initially supposed to cost $7 million, but it ended up costing almost 15 times that much. Which just goes to show that the Australian government has been getting cost estimates wildly wrong, absolutely nowhere fucking near what they ended up costing, for a very, very long time. Also, the government were a bunch of fucking assholes to Bjarne Utzon, the designer of the Opera House, for no good reason. In 1965, a guy called Robert Askin was elected, and he really did not like the project. Plus, Askin's new Minister for Public Works, David Hughes, fucking hated the idea of one of Australia's most iconic buildings being designed by a non-Australian. And these two butted heads so much that eventually Utzon just left. So Utzon had an idea of what the interiors were going to look like, which was just completely fucking ignored by the new government. Utzon left right before the shells were complete, and at that point the project had only cost $22.9 million, which admittedly is still 3 times the original estimate, but after Hughes and co. made some changes to Utzon's plans for the interiors, the total cost wound up being $80 million more than that. Moral of the story, just let talented people do their fucking thing and don't interfere and meddle with it thinking you know better. You don't. Anyway, next we're going to take to the seas, and we're going to talk about the Spirit of Tasmania 4 and 5. I'm gonna be honest, I think a lot of Australians forget Tasmania exists sometimes. You ever see like a keychain of Australia? There's like a 50% chance that Tasmania's just gone. But yeah, being separated from the mainland means you obviously need either a plane or a boat to get there. Boats between the mainland and Tasmania have been a thing since Australia was a thing, but the Spirit of Tasmania started in 1993. The Spirit of Tasmania 1 and 2 weren't even built for that purpose. They were just some finished ships built in the late 90s that were then sold to Spirit of Tasmania in the early 2000s. There was actually a Spirit of Tasmania 3 for about 3 years, and then they got rid of it. Don't know what that was about. In 2018, they announced that they were going to be replacing the 2 old ships from the 90s with some new models, which would be dubbed the Spirit of Tasmania 4 and 5. And this time it wasn't going to be a repurposed boat, it was going to be built from scratch to be Spirit of Tasmania. The initial plan was to have it built by German manufacturer Flensburger Schifflerberg. That deal was apparently mutually cancelled in February of 2020, and they swapped to using the Finnish company Roma Marine Constructions, which was then cancelled a few months later in July of 2020. Gee, I wonder why. Then in 2021 they uncancelled the deal with Roma Marine, stating that the completed vessels would arrive in Australia either late 2024 or early 2025. So that didn't fucking happen. The wharf's construction cost was $90 million, but then by 2024 had been revised to $495 million. That's a little bit off. That's a little bit off, guys. There's a little bit more than a bloody rounding error. In May 2025, the Spirit 4 was due to leave for Tasmania, but both new vessels had problems with their liquefied natural gas systems and could not leave till the issue was rectified. The Spirit of Tasmania 4 arrived in Hobart in August 2025. Now, I don't watch the fucking news anymore, right, in Australia. The only reason I even found out about this problem was because I was in Tasmania, in Hobart, in October of 2025, and I was like, why is the Spirit of Tasmania here? That's not supposed to be there. This thing doesn't go to Hobart. Why is it just sitting there? In September of 2025, it emerged that $9 million was going to be needed to replace fenders at the new wharf in Devonport and strengthen the Spirit 4 and the Spirit 5, as TT Liners requested incorrect specifications to the wharf back in 2023. Spirit of Tasmania operator refused to allow Tasports to speak to shipbuilder over design concerns. The exchanges were between project-level staff at TT Line and Tasports, with the emails revealed as part of a review of the scandal-plagued project. Okay, so in 2023, the owners of Spirit of Tasmania told the wharf at Devonport to make changes to the fenders to accommodate the new vessels. The people who owned the wharf thought that the changes were odd and tried to question them, but were refused access to the shipbuilder to clarify concerns, and the incorrect designs just went ahead, resulting in $9 million in works to rectify the problems. As it transpires, the original specification would have been the correct one. This doesn't make any Spirit of Tasmania is a... Hold on. Okay, just to make this perfectly clear, Tasports is a state-owned company, meaning they are owned by the government. The Spirit of Tasmania is also a government business enterprise, meaning they are also owned by the government. So you have two entities, both owned by the government. TT Line told Tasport, change the specifications, change it to this. Tasport were like, that's weird. Are you sure? Can we see why you've made this decision? No! Okay, we don't escalate this, we just go ahead with what they say, and it turns out they were completely fucking wrong. If they'd literally done nothing and just gone with the original specifications, they would have been perfectly fine. That is such a fucking retarded way to burn $9 million. Oh my god, dude. What the fuck possible reason would two entities, government entities, from the same government, have to not give each other important information? Like, why would you refuse to give that? Aren't you a team? Aren't you supposed to be working together? TT Line was essentially out of cash before the Tasmanian government approved a $400 million increase to its borrowing limit. It is unlikely to be the last time the ferry operator needs a government bailout. Okay, so we're now bailing out this company that gave the wrong specifications. Oh, look at that. They also had to bail out the Finnish guys back when they were building the fucking thing. It was also apparently costing $47,000 a week to just sit there in Leith. That's a hell of a fucking parking ticket. The second of the new vessels, Spirit 5, will start its journey from Finland to Scotland. It will cost TT Line $600,000 a month to berth the ship. Wasn't it berthing at Leith before for like $48,000 a week? We're now at $600,000 a month? $48,000 a week wasn't enough, apparently. So we're now paying about $150,000 per week. The committee heard it costs $1 million a month to berth the ships in Hobart due to the requirement to move ships regularly in an active port. Wait, why does it cost fucking anything to berth it in Hobart? The Australian government owns every company involved in this scenario. What are they paying themselves? Who is this $1 million going to? Hull fix will benefit local contractors, Premier says. Unclear if the person responsible is still employed. Remember folks, doesn't matter how badly people fuck up, doesn't matter how much of your money the government burns, nobody will ever be held responsible. And because nobody's ever held responsible, it will happen again. So the next section's a bit of a grab bag, which I've elected to call trams, trains and automobiles. Government ineptitude and a lack of competition is sending the price of mega projects, new motorways and metros soaring, and taxpayers are picking up the tab. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money is being blown on infrastructure mega projects because the state governments are too weak at driving a hard bargain. That's the conclusion of a new report by Grattan Institute, which concluded that at least $1.4 billion had been overspent on just 3 recent mega projects due to failures in competition and bureaucratic bungling that could have been avoided. I like that phrase. Bureaucratic bungling. Yeah, corporate welfare from the taxpayers is a good way to describe it, actually. So starting off with some new trams in Sydney. Sydney's new light rail cost $500 million more than expected when lead contractor Acciona took the NSF took the New South Wales government to court after it accused authorities of failing to provide it with proper information on the amount of work that would be needed to move power cables so it could build the tram lines. Acciona Australia Managing Director Bede Noonan has told the parliamentary inquiry one of his colleagues described the guidelines as a crap-the-pants document because the impact was so significant. Receiving these guidelines only after the contract was signed was like they dropped a bomb on us. Mr. Noonan said, Mr. Noonan sounds like the host of like a children's television program. The cost of Sydney's new metro lines is set to blow out by $6 billion. Okay, why? Why is it going to cost $6 billion more? They're blaming funding black holes created by the former government and said building 3 metro lines at once has pushed up prices by making the projects compete with each other. It also found scope and design changes during the decade-long building process created cost pressures. 2 of the lines now slated to cost more than double the initial estimates. Who's doing these fucking estimates? Is it the same guy that estimated the Opera House is going to be $7 million? Is it the same dude? I think you gotta fire the fucking estimate guy at this point. You see, whoever's making these estimates, you're missing out on a very important part of the equation here. You're missing the dumb cunt factor. If you're in a place like Australia, well then going by our history with these sort of projects, the dumb cunt factor is at least 4. So you should just times every estimate by that, just to get even close to an accurate figure of what it will actually end up costing in the end. Next, we have an issue with some trains from Queensland. The state government had to pay $360 million extra to alter a new train fleet it signed off on because it fell foul of the state's own laws. What? Okay, so Queensland apparently, the Queensland government ordered some new trains with specifications that breached Queensland's own laws. The trains didn't meet disability access legislation, with the ludicrous result that a wheelchair user might not be able to squeeze between the seats to get to the supposedly disabled loos, which were in fact inaccessible for some disabled passengers. To my non-Australian viewers, loo is just a funny word we invented for toilet. The $4.4 billion trains were essentially illegal, with the state paying $361 million to rectify the bodge job. And then moving on now to Melbourne's Westgate Tunnel. Less than a year after Andrews took office, Transurban came knocking on the government's door with an unsolicited proposal. The deal looked great for the state. Transurban would bear the majority of costs to build it, but to fund it, motorists using CityLink would be paying tolls for an extra decade, up until the mid-2040s. The scheme infuriated the opposition, who voiced concerns that people that weren't even using the tunnel were still being forced to pay for it. In 2019, it was also revealed that then Treasurer Tim Pallas had shares in Transurban, creating a furor in Parliament and claims that it was a conflict of interest. The delays were due to contaminated soil at the tunnel site, and it was argued that pollutants were unforeseen, triggering a standoff over who would pay the extra costs to remove and store it. The government also had to find a suitable location to dump the toxic soil, angering communities earmarked for long-term storage. The state's contribution swelled from $400 million to at least $4.2 billion, which could grow again as the dispute about the final cost is still not resolved.
There needs to be solutions instead of pointing fingers.
When I listen to the Andrews government saying that it's going to be complete on time, well, I believe that pigs can fly.
So across the board, the Australian government consistently ends up spending way more time and money on stuff than they initially said they were going to. Yet it doesn't matter how badly they fuck up or how many times they fuck up, you still have to keep paying them. Imagine if you were the owner of like a fast food restaurant and one of your employees consistently got orders wrong, charged customers too much for it, and then took way too long to deliver it, but you were forced against your will to continue to pay that person until the end of time. That's what it's like being a taxpayer under a government like this. It's why involuntary taxes are really, really bad, because there is absolutely no fucking incentive for them not to fuck up, because what are you going to do about it? The fuck are you going to do about it? It's illegal for you to do anything about it. Now, the next incident I'm going to talk about was a really bad one, because not only did it cost millions of dollars, it also cost lives. I'm talking about the collapse of the Westgate Bridge. So in 1970, on the 14th of October, the Westgate Bridge was nearing completion when an 11cm gap was reported between the two spans. They tried to use Kentall edge weights to push down the structure and realign the girders, however by all accounts too much weight was used, causing the bridge to buckle. And on the following day, when they were attempting to straighten the buckle, a 112 metre long span of the bridge weighing 2,000 tonnes collapsed and plummeted 50 metres into the Yarra River below. 35 construction workers were killed, many of whom were on their lunch break underneath the bridge in the workers' huts, essentially either being crushed by the falling span or working on top of it when it collapsed. After some changes were made to the design intended to make the bridge a bit stronger, construction resumed and the bridge was eventually opened to the public in 1978. Okay, so I was just in the middle of trying to search how much the bridge actually cost. I can only find the figure of the finished bridge that we have now. I don't know exactly how much of this is attributed to the old version of the bridge and the cleanup of that, if any. I can't really seem to find those figures anywhere. But I just see down here, in 2006, the state government spent $1.3 million on erecting railway-style boom barriers at each entrance to the bridge to block traffic in the event of a terrorist attack. Can somebody please explain to me how a couple boom gates cost $1.3 million fucking dollars? How much does a boom gate cost? Okay, I know this is like AI overview, whatever the fuck, I don't care. I'm going to assume there's some level of accuracy here. $2,000 to $10,000 is a long fucking way from $1.6 million. How the fuck did it cost $1.6 million to put boom gates on the bridge? That doesn't make any fucking sense. Anyway, so there was a royal commission into the collapse of the bridge. So the immediate trigger was the removal of bolts from a transverse splice in the upper flange plating near mid-span, which were taken out to try and fix the buckle. However, attributing the collapse solely to one bolt removal would be misleading. The root causes go much deeper. This bit kind of rubs me the wrong way, because it's like the primary failure lay with the design. It's like, no, come on. No, it doesn't. Who's the captain of this fucking ship? You are. You're the captain. This is a government project. It is the government's responsibility to ensure that shit like this doesn't happen. If it does, that's a failure of the government. You failed to prevent this outcome. There's an article here called Evaporated Responsibility, the Collapse of the Westgate Bridge in Melbourne. The government of Victoria in 1966 became the guarantor of the repayment of the debenture funds. So in reality, Leica became what in British language is known as a quango, a quasi-non-governmental organisation. What the fuck? Quango? What's a fucking quango? A semi-public administrative body outside the civil service but receiving financial support from the government. While the hybrid nature of Leica already diluted governmental responsibility, the governance structure was especially fragmented on the private business side as well, which implied predictable fault lines that weakened the effectiveness and accountability of the project management. Here's another quote from a newspaper that was written shortly after the incident that I think kind of summarises the whole thing pretty well. The Westgate Bridge fiasco is a horrifying example of the failure of governments composed of non-specialists to understand and adequately supervise projects involving complex technical matters. Okay, I just found this by accident about the Spirit of Tasmania. Apparently the Spirit of Tasmania V came loose and drifted into an embankment in Finland. Man, these boats can't catch a fucking break, dude. Anyway. I kind of mentioned back in my Halo video that, like, if you cannot pinpoint specific people who are responsible for the poor quality of a game and then remove those people, the next game is going to suffer from the exact same fucking issues. And I think that's 100 times more important in situations where lives could be lost. You can't just have this, like, nebulous cloud of overcomplicated bullshit surrounding everything so that if something does happen, nobody knows who the fuck to blame. Now we're going to talk about the National Broadband Network. You know what? No, just I don't want to. It's too painful. I can't do it. I can't talk about this. It's too traumatic, dude. I can't go through this again. We're just gonna watch a clip from Friendly Geordies and then we're gonna move the fuck on with our lives.
Where they unveiled mixed technology, or as it's known by industry experts, mechanical puke. As it is, are you ready for this? 1% as fast as Labor's broadband. I wonder why there was barely a whisper from any of Rupert Murdoch's corporate whores posing as journalists that Labor's broadband could have reached speeds of 1,000 megabits per second and would have cost us $45 billion, while the Liberal Party's broadband is costing us $50 billion and is currently delivering us speeds of 10.
So in short, Rupert Murdoch came into the room and Rupert Murdoch all over the place. This really was like a once a century type of project because of how expensive and large scale it was. And rather than replacing the entire network with fibre optic, we only replaced some of it with fibre optic, and the rest is still running on 100-year-old wires made of copper! Okay, moving on before I say something that's going to get me put on a list. Alright, so we're coming to the end of the list here. I want to give a dishonourable mention to the East-West link, where we spent $1.1 billion on absolutely fucking nothing. That was pretty cool. It would almost be a good launching point to talk about quite a few different topics that I might cover in some other video in the future. Maybe, if I feel like it, no promises. But for now, to cap this video off, we're going to talk about one of the most infamous construction projects in Australian history, the Melbourne Airport Railway. A promise that Australian politicians have been breaking for the past 60 years. Sydney, Brisbane and Perth all have train lines that connect the city to the airport, but Darwin, Hobart, Canberra, Adelaide and most confusingly Melbourne don't, which is very strange considering the Sydney to Melbourne flight is the 5th busiest route in the entire world. The smaller cities not having a train kind of makes sense, you know, but like Melbourne is a lot fucking higher in population than Darwin. So currently at Melbourne Airport, your only option is to have a friend come and pick you up, or get a very expensive taxi, or a very expensive Uber, or you got to pay $25 per person for the Sky Bus. And if you really want... Dude, every time I try to record a video at something, now there's possums on the fucking ceiling. Are you done? Oh my god. Or you can fuck around with the orange public transport buses, which nobody likes to do. Nobody likes these things, everybody hates having to use them, and we only use them when we absolutely fucking have to. And in this case, you have to like get a bus to another train station and then take that train station into the city. It's just fucking shit. Dropping people off here is not fun because you've just got this like little section right here where you can drop people off and it's so fucking busy and you have to wait so long for a space, and it's just like right next to the fucking freeway. So it's like there's a lot of traffic. This tiny little strip of a departure zone just cannot handle how busy this place gets. Also, surprise, surprise, the people who make money off of all the parking fares around the airport, they're against the train line being built. I wonder fucking why. People have been waiting on this train station for over half a century now. It was first suggested back in 1958. A year later, they announced that they were planning on making the railway, but there were several different concepts being discussed. But it wasn't good enough for these people to just do a normal fucking ass train line just on the ground like all the other train lines at the time. No, they had to be fucking extra with it, which is why you had some people being like, we want a giant monorail. The manager of Trans Australian Airlines, John Ryland, proposed a high-speed underground railway. And then there was a fellow called Sir Reginald Ansett, who was the owner of Ansett Transport Industries, which was the direct competitor to Trans Australian Airlines, and he was opposed to the train line because he thought that freeways and helicopters would become the primary mode of transport for most people. And the reason he thought that is because he commuted to work in a helicopter every single day and was just like, this is what everyone will be doing in a few years. Let's just ignore the fact that I'm a fucking multi-millionaire. Can you imagine the constant fucking noise if everybody used a helicopter instead of a car, and it was just be like thousands of helicopters overhead at all times going in all different directions? Anyway, so what's happened between the 50s and now? Well, basically the Australian government has spent the past 50 years doing what they always do, which is arguing about doing stuff instead of actually doing stuff. The current attempt, which started in the late 2010s, is probably the closest we've got, and I think it is actually going to happen, maybe, but hey, remember 50 years ago when they were arguing about whether it should be above ground or below ground? Guess what? Guess what? You want to know why we still don't have the train line yet? It's because they've had the exact same fucking argument all over again, and I'm not kidding! Because the government wants to build an above ground station, and the airport wants to build an underground station. This same exact fucking argument has been going on for over half a century. Apparently this year, the airport and the government signed a memorandum of understanding, and the airports agreed to let them build it above ground, and here it is, folks, the culmination of 60 years of pointless bickering. 2 straight fucking lines. According to the 2025 budget estimate, this particular version of the project has already cost almost $933 million. So one would hope we actually get it this time. But remember, this is the Australian government we're talking about. There are no limits to their incompetence.
Opposition leader Mr Buswell made national headlines by admitting he sniffed a chair vacated by a female staff member.
You know, at least a private company actually has an incentive to not waste billions of fucking dollars because it's their money on the line. Whereas all these, like, government twerps, they don't give a fuck. Because at the end of the day, they still get paid, no matter what. By us. And why would they give a shit about overspending? It's not their money. Anyway. That's going to do it for this video. I will be bullying the Australian government again at some undetermined point in the future, 100%. I can talk about whatever I want to talk about on this channel. And sometimes I want to talk shit, especially when it's about these fucking Anyway, that's all for now. I'll see you in the next one. I started this video with a random clip from Channel 9, so...
Often the calves, when you go in there, will suck your fingers or your clothes or whatever they can get their mouths on, and they sucked the wedding ring off this man's finger.
What about this? So this guy went home presumably and told his wife, listen, I was at the cow farm today and I lost my wedding ring because a cow sucked it off.
That's right. Or maybe his wife was asking what else the cow was sucking off. Maybe I shouldn't have said that on telly.
I'm glad you said it, brother, and not me. Hey.
Yeah.